welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in History Through Film. Today, we're going to start the last third of our unit. This unit has been on Eastern civilizations. We started by looking at China, and then we started looking at Japan, and really the last leg of this is the modern Middle East. We're going to look at three different conflicts that have occurred in the Middle East, and really in the last 100 years. And look at their significance along with that. So the three themes we'll cover in this section of the unit are, we'll start by looking at Iran and the Iran hostage crisis. Then we'll look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and then we'll look at a more recent phenomenon, something called Arab Spring, that started in 2010 and is still going on today. So those are the three pieces we're going to look at, but today we're going to focus on Iran and the Iran hostage crisis. So our learning target that goes with this, that's going to kind of lead us into this story today, says, summarize the Iran hostage crisis, including the declassified Argo story. Because this is a History Through Film course, the movie we have chosen to go along with this part of the unit is the Academy Award-winning film Argo. And so in order to understand that movie properly, we need to do some background work on Iran and the Iran hostage crisis, because the movie is sort of an offshoot of that, and you'll see how that's going to work. First of all, let's talk a little bit about Iran. Just a little interesting story that I can provide. So when I was in college, I took an economics class from this older woman who she was just such a nice lady. She could explain everything to me that made sense. I'm not a math guy, so I really appreciated how she was able to explain the laws of supply and demand and all of these other economic properties. And she always used pizzas and robots. Like, if you made this many pizzas, you could only make this many robots. And it just clicked with me. And so for my major, I needed to take 2 more economics courses. So when I saw that she offered a couple others, I was excited to sign up for them. But when I showed up on day 1, my sophomore year, there was a completely different professor there. So the university had switched the teacher on me, and my teacher, whose name I honestly don't remember, I just remember he was from Iran, and he made a big deal. He goes, it's not Iran. Here in the United States, we want to say Iran because that's what it looks like it spells, but it's pronounced Iran. So I'm going to do my best to at least acknowledge that and respect their culture and call this Iran. So Iran is right there in the heart of the Middle East. You can see from this map, Iraq is right to the west, Afghanistan right to the east. There's certainly oil in this region, a lot of Islam in this region. In fact, it is one of the strongest Islamic areas in the world. So we've got some interesting cultural things going on there with both their economy and their religion. So let's get a quick little background on Iran here. Iran was once part of the mighty Persian Empire. Now, if you haven't taken world history as a junior yet, you'll cover the Persian Empire once you get to your unit on ancient Greece. So if you don't know who the Persians are, that's something you will learn a little bit later. For you seniors, that might be something you learned last year. But the Persians really were this huge empire, multicultural empire that included Turkey and Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, lots of different territories in the Middle East, and have shaped a lot of their culture ever since. And then most people are familiar with the Persians as they fought the Greeks in the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Thermopylae, the Battle of Salamis, and several others. So a little historical background there. Today, Iran is a big oil-producing company. They're a founding member of the United Nations and OPEC, which is, of course, related to oil. So certainly their economy is very much tied to oil. As mentioned, they're a multicultural nation of numerous ethnic and linguistic groups, and that has everything to do with history. Like I said, you had the Persian Empire there. You've got the Ottoman Empire that was in that region up until World War I. You've got an Islamic empire called the Safavids that were through there. So there's been lots of different empires that have ruled this territory, and certainly because of the trade networks that exist within there, the Persians had a trade network called the Royal Road. You had a lot of people coming and going. And when that happens, you're bringing in new culture, you're bringing in new customs, you're bringing in new ways to eat and dress and all that stuff. So there's definitely been a lot of different groups that have occupied Iran over its many, many, many centuries. Today, it is very Islamic country. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Religion plays a huge role in their politics, in their day-to-day operations. And the interesting thing about Islam is there are really two main branches. Most of the Islamic community, most Muslims in the world today follow the branch called Sunni. So they're Sunni Muslims. However, there is another branch that is almost completely isolated within the country of Iran, and that is the Shia branch of Islam. So most of the inhabitants of Iran today are called Shiites, which means they follow the Shia branch of Islam. It's a much more strict branch of Islam, and part of the reason there's a split, and I'll give you the modified simple version here, but Muhammad was the prophet who started Islam. He was the one who was visited by the angel Gabriel and was told to spread the word that there was one true God. Well, after his death, there was some disagreement on who should continue on leading the faith. The successors of Muhammad were called caliphs, and so some said that the successors needed to be blood relatives of Muhammad. Others said no, they don't need to be, and that's where the divide came. Those who believed that the successors of Islam needed to be true blood relatives of Muhammad are the ones that follow the Shia branch, and they are in the minority in the Muslim community today. If you were to look on a map and see where most Muslims are located, you would find a lot of Muslims in northern Africa, certainly in the Middle East, in Malaysia. But if we were to break that down further and see where Sunnis versus Shia are, the Shia are pretty much isolated to Iran. I mean, there's a couple other minor locations, but Iran is kind of the hub for that today, and that has a lot to do with history. An empire called the Safavids were very strong in bringing that to this region. So these are things you'll learn in your world history course as a junior. But I'm just giving you this background because I think it matters in this story, especially when we look at the Iran hostage crisis. Because religion's very much tied to it. The Iran hostage crisis was a very, very scary time in the late 70s. And not to give you too much of a spoiler, but it ends up turning out quite positively. And I mean that because these hostages are released safely, and that's the best part. But that doesn't mean for a little over a year things weren't really scary, because they were. So let's talk about what the Iran hostage crisis is, and really what that meant for Iran and for the United States. So Iranian citizens had a ruler they called the Shah, and I'm not going to give you his name here. The movie Argo is going to do that for us, but he was not a very good ruler. The people were upset with the rule of the Shah. He was supported by the U.S. and the U.K. In fact, we helped put him there. He was oppressive. He had his lunches flown in from France. He spent a lot of money on himself. Meanwhile, the people in Iran were hungry. They were poor. That's not typically a good historical model to follow if your people are starving and you're living lavishly. So the people were not happy with the ruler, the Shah. And the Shah is a title that has come from the Persian Empire. The Safavids used it. So it's kind of like president or emperor or pharaoh. So Shah is a title. So his reign was very oppressive and was very manipulated by those dependent on Iran's oil. So the U.S., we kind of controlled him. We kind of had a hand in this whole situation. So certainly the United States we're not clean in this situation. And the people of Iran kind of knew that. So the Shah eventually they demand him to make changes. They demand him out of there. So the Shah fled to the United States. He actually fled here. At one point he was in Rochester because he had gone to the Mayo Clinic. He had been very sick and came to get checked up here at the Mayo Clinic. So he fled to the United States, including Minnesota. And the citizens of Iran demanded him back for trial during their Iranian Revolution. They thought he had hurt them. They thought that he was a criminal and deserved to stand trial. Well, we wouldn't give him back. he was here in the United States and we took care of him. That made the people in Iran very angry. And so 52 Americans were basically held hostage. The Iranian people, they stormed the American embassy in Iran and they took 52 Americans hostage. And it's going to be one of those situations, people are like, oh, this is going to be over in a couple of days, it's going to be over in a week, and that just was not the case. As the weeks went by, people started to get very scared and very desperate. We even tried a rescue operation. Jimmy Carter was the president at the time, and Jimmy Carter attempted Operation Eagle Claw. Well, it failed miserably. It was a failed rescue attempt. 2 of our own aircrafts crashed into each other, and 8 of our American servicemen were killed. So it was kind of a big humiliation in an attempt to save these 52 Americans. Carter was unable to negotiate the hostages' release, and this is 1979. Carter's going to be up for re-election in 1980, and certainly I think this is going to kind of be one of the last nails in the coffin, so to speak, for his presidency. He would not get re-elected. And the hostages were eventually released after 444 days in captivity. Can you imagine that? That's a little over a year. They were sometimes tied up to a chair all day, but for the most part, they were treated well enough. I mean, it's not like they were whipped, beaten, starved. I mean, I'm sure they could have used more food. They weren't treated awfully, I'm trying to say. But they were released, all of them safely after 444 days. And the release was negotiated by Ronald Reagan shortly after he was sworn in the following year. Well, that leads us to the movie Argo, because Argo is an offshoot of this. I'm not going to read all this to you. This is actually going to be on your video assignment for the film. But basically, there were 6 other people in that embassy that were able to get out. And so they were not part of the 52 hostages that were held within the embassy, but they were stuck at the Canadian ambassador's house in the city of Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. And so the story is, how do we get these 6 people home? And it's a really kind of fantastic story about a made-up movie and a made-up film crew to try to get these 6 Americans back home. And so that's why we're going to watch the film Argo as it relates to this part of the unit. Now, just a little bit more about Iran today. Iran, they've been trying to build nuclear power, nuclear power stations, and we've of course been worried that they're going to build nuclear weapons. And that was a scary thing for a while, because their leader, whose name was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was very anti-Israeli. He was very anti-United States. And, of course, the thought was, well, if he is pursuing nuclear power, he's probably also pursuing nuclear weapons. And if he's anti-Israel and he were to use those weapons on Israel, which will make more sense when we see the next part of this unit, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that could certainly spell problems for all sorts of countries, including the United States. Could potentially lead to World War III. Well, he's not in power anymore. That has changed. Like I said, he and Iran were traditionally anti-Israel, which is an ally of the United States. But they've had an election since then. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is no longer in power, so they elected a slightly more liberal leader, Hassan Rouhani, who was elected in 2013. But he does not have full control over Iran's foreign policy, armed forces, or nuclear power, because they actually have 2 leaders. So those responsibilities fall to their supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. So you've got these 2 guys who are the leaders of Iran today. They're a little bit more cooperative. They're a little bit more liberal. They're a little bit more willing to, negotiate peaceful terms of nuclear power and things like that will lessen the tensions between the United States and Israel and any other countries that might certainly be involved in a bigger conflict if that were to ever happen. So, knock on wood, things are going pretty well right now. So that brings us to the end. We've got a little background on who the Iranian people were. We've got a little bit of information on what happened during the Iran hostage crisis, and I finished up by talking about the state of Iran today. So once we see the film Argo, we can fully answer this question. We can complete our learning target here. It says summarize the Iran hostage crisis, including the declassified Argo story. So that's how all that fits together here. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.